All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to True Crime Loser. I hope you're doing well. Hope you had a good Mother's Day. So today, I'm going to talk about the James Holmes interview with a psychiatrist. So James Holmes shot up a movie theater in 2012, and then 2 years later, in 2014, the judge appointed a psychiatrist to go and interview him. And then they released it in the past couple months. And I thought that it was about 3 hours when I told you guys that I was going to go over this interview. I thought it was like 3 hours. And then this past weekend, I realized I thought it was like 12 hours. And then yesterday, I realized that it's actually like 25 hours. The channel that I was watching it on was called Stay Informed, and it was probably the most difficult and frustrating. The way that that channel titled the videos just made it almost impossible to work through. The titles would be like hashtag breaking, shows no remorse. What was it? Shows no remorse, 13th interview, and then the word 13th would be spelled out, not like 1-3, like spelled out. And so it was really hard to figure out how many parts of this there were on this channel, Stay Informed, and it was really hard to pick up where I'd left off when I would have to do something else, and it was just sort of a nightmare. And I listened to it for 8 hours straight yesterday. I started at 9:30 in the morning, and just the whole day I listened to it with headphones on. And then at 4 p.m. yesterday, YouTube recommended me Susan Bonds had put it up to in nice, simple, easy to nicely titled, big 5-hour chunks instead of 1 hour, and seeing Susan Bond's name and the green check mark she uses was like seeing a waterfall after being lost in the desert. So in the description of this video, I'm going to link 15 to 20 hours of the interview in easy, nicely titled, simple videos from Susan Bond. Subscribe to her channel. She's a treasure. So if the channel Stay Informed, whoever runs that channel is listening to this or ever sees it, you got to work on your titles. What are you doing? It makes it impossible for someone trying to find what you put up. And then also for you, it makes it people want to leave or they can't find it. So just think about it. If it's an interview with James Holmes, maybe put James Holmes in the title. I don't know. Maybe put interview in the title. Maybe make the title less than a paragraph long. Okay, so anyway, let's get into this. Also, Susan Bonds is going through it. I saw on her channel. I haven't had a chance to look it up, but she's going through and analyzing this interview too. So go check that out. She's doing it where the interview is behind her and her face is on the screen in a little square. So the goal for my coverage is I'm going to try to take, because the interview goes all over the place. It's not chronological. They jump all over his life and they go over a lot of things twice, and it's very slow. It's very in depth to the point where I would get annoyed with the psychiatrist, because in my head I was like, I understand what James is saying and the point he's making, and the psychiatrist just keeps asking qualifying questions. So it gets pretty tedious and it gets really long. And so hopefully this coverage will be for the people that really don't want to dive all the way into the 20 hours, can just listen to this for an hour and a half. I'm going to do a couple episodes on it, and then I put mine chronologically. So I'm going to try to tell the story chronologically, adding a lot of the highlights from the interview in. And so hopefully, if you don't want to wade through the 25 hours of this nut job, then you can just, this will be like the one-stop short shop. And if you want to go more in depth, the interview will be in the description. And if you want to go real in depth, Susan Bond is analyzing it, I think, the whole thing from start to finish. So let's get into it. So James Holmes, July 20th, 2012, goes into a midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises and just unloads on the audience. Absolutely terrifying. I had moved to New York City June 21st, 2012, so almost exactly a month before. So I remember I had moved out to New York. I'd never lived anywhere other than, Colorado. I'd lived in Denver at the time. Very close to Aurora, actually. I live downtown Denver, but Aurora is a suburb of Denver, and where I lived in downtown Denver was on the side of Denver closest to that suburb. I actually think I bought this piano in Aurora. I was trying to find it last night, but I drove out to what I remember I think is a Yamaha store in Aurora. One time I went on this horrific date with a girl from Aurora where I had been in this like 4-year relationship. We'd broken up. I was not over it or ready to go out on a date, and I went out on a date with this girl, and I remember just like being sad, and I was skinnier than I normally am because I was just not over this girl and not really eating. So what little weight I had was like not even there, and I remember the girl just looking at me across the dinner table like, this guy is no use to me. He's not over this past girl. Like, it was a horrible date. I had family in Aurora. Anyway, it's just a nice little suburb of Denver. And, all right, but we'll get to the shooting as we move through this. But to this day, at least as far as when this interview was done 2 hours after the shooting, James Holmes is really, to boil down his worldview or the way he looks at life as simply as possible, and this takes about 8 hours of the interview to come up with this, but he thinks that the phrase, any problem can be solved with death. Nothing like an optimist, huh? So he has a symbol that I think he created that means that any problem can be solved with death. And it's on his cell wall, and going through the interview, he feels that to this day. He also has a theory that he believes to this day that each human, he calls it human capital, each human has a value. He calls it a value of 1. And if you kill someone, you get their value. So in his opinion, he is worth 13 because he killed 12 people, and then he gets that 12 and then hit the 1 that he gets just from being. So he's worth 13. So when asked, what was the shooting successful? What was successful about it? That's still one of the main reasons to this day is that he goes, now I am worth more. I'm worth more. I'm worth 13. And he says everything that a person was going to do, all their potential and everything they were going to accomplish is canceled out and now is transferred to him once he kills them. Okay. Cool, James. And then, let's see. I think that's kind of summarizes his worldview a little bit. All right, so let's get into this. Something that stood out to me about the whole thing was they asked the psychiatrist, who I thought was really good. He is he's got a nice tone of voice. I thought he asked great questions. At one point, he leaned forward, the only point in the interview, and I got to see, and he's balding with a ponytail, which is one of my favorite possible hairstyles that people can have. You know, it's like if you're going to go bald, why not have a ponytail? Dave Attell, who's one of my favorite comedians, was rocking that hairstyle for like a year, and he had this joke that was like, "People, I'm bald with a ponytail. I could run any Ferris wheel in America." I think it's funny that if you're bald in a ponytail, you can just automatically run a Ferris wheel. And so I was chuckling that this psychiatrist could run any Ferris wheel in America. But I thought he did a great job. There's a lot of comments on the video saying that he I guess, didn't do a good job, or he was too old. They should have picked a younger psychiatrist because he didn't, some of the computer stuff or some of the social media questions he was just a little bit behind on. But I think he did a great job. He was judge appointed to do this interview, and there wasn't really a time limit, as you can see, with the 25 hours. So they were really able to go pretty deep with all this stuff. And one part of the interview that really stuck out for me was the psychiatrist was asking the first time that his family came and saw him after the shooting, and after, he's in this prison or jail, or it's kind of like a hospital / prison, but he's in total solitary confinement. And he was asking about his parents, or the psychiatrist was asking the first time his parents came and saw him after. And I was just picturing, like, other than your kid being, something happening to your own kid, or them being missing, or something like this has got to be, for a parent, the biggest nightmare that you can ever imagine. To just get a phone call about your kid that painted his head up like the Joker and then did a mass shooting. And there's an interview on YouTube where his parents talk, and his dad is a little bit of has a little bit social anxiety, but they seem like really nice people. And watching the interview of them talk about it, they don't really seem in denial about it, almost more than any parents that I've ever seen that go through something like this. Like the George Hughley the Fifth, his mom was just totally delusional about the whole situation. She talks about her son in jail like he lives on a nice little stretch with some gentlemen, and he's got a job, he wipes the tables off, and he's got a roommate, he's got a room, and he's got a mate. And then, like, Cindy Watts is like, maybe you should appeal it, Chris. Anybody want some ice cream? Oh, that scared little T. And so sometimes, a lot of times, and I always say that I don't blame the parents for just being painfully delusional about it. And I think it's probably just a coping mechanism where you really just can't accept what happened. But James Holmes' parents, they're just like, yeah, our kid is a mass murderer. And that is really not what we were hoping. I don't know. Check out the interview of his parents. But anyway, so the psychiatrist is asking, James, did they come and see you after? And James is like, yeah. And it's probably good to mention that James Holmes is heavily medicated, and his pupils have been large since he got there, and I would assume it's from the medication. So he's sitting there like this, and he kind of smiles the whole time. I think it's just bliss to him to be out of solitary and to be talking to someone like the psychiatrist, talking to someone who's smart, and he is just so starved because he's so alone all the time. I think he's just absolute. But it makes the whole thing even more absurd, because he's sitting there kind of smiling, and he doesn't really move his hands. They just sort of sit in his lap, and he just kind of sits there like this, and he doesn't talk that much. So the psychiatrist is like, did you have lunch? They'll like take and he's like, yep. And he answers, yep, and no. It's like, I had lunch, yep. And it's like, so when you bought the explosives to put in your apartment, did you buy the gas and the napalm? And he's just is like, yep. So he's at these horrifying questions, and he's just sitting there with this face of, he is absolutely terrifying, with probably the worst outlook and theories I've seen on life ever. So he's asking him, did your parents come and see you, James? Yep. And it's like, what was that a good visit? Yep. Is there anything, James, that you can, that stands out to you about the visit? No. It's just horrifying. So picture this. So you're being led to just the absolute belly of like a prison, insane asylum, just to the darkest, deepest hole in that prison, to meet with your son for the first time since he caused absolute terror and hell on earth and ruined countless families and lives. And the psychiatrist asks James, he goes, what did you guys talk about? And it always surprises me how the mundane just goes with the ultra violence. And he goes, they told me a story about how they were in IKEA and it was big and confusing and they got lost. And it's like, it's just funny to me that the first thing you say to you, like, for a while there, every comedian had the IKEA store is big and confusing bit about it, because everybody was talking about it for a while. It's just like, did you get lost in IKEA? God, it's so big. And it just blew my mind that was it. Hey, James, how are you? I haven't seen you in a while. And they're just talking about IKEA. All right, so like I said, it's a totally daunting amount of information, this interview. I still have like 4 hours left that I'm going to do today, so I can add anything that I leave out today, tomorrow. He's heavily medicated during this whole interview. I think he takes an antipsychotic and an antidepressant 2 times a day. And so if you've ever been around anyone that's on antipsychotics, kind of makes them shake a little bit. Like if they get a drink, they'll like steady it with, they'll steady it. It's really sad. One time, my whole family, we were back in Grand Junction for Christmas. It was my sister and her husband and me, and this is before I was dating my girlfriend, and my parents, and we decided to go to a movie together. I think it was on Christmas Eve. We're like, we'll go to a movie together, and then we'll come back and eat Christmas Eve dinner. And we get to the movie, and my sister's husband, this is in Grand Junction, my sister's husband, we run into like his old friend at the movie, and he's there alone, and it comes out that this friend has had like horrible bipolar disease and is just really had struggles mentally and has gotten in a ton of trouble and is on all these antipsychotic medications, and was at the movies alone on Christmas Eve. And so my sister's husband said to like my parents, like, can I invite him back for dinner tonight? He's all alone. He's got bipolar horrifically. Can we just invite him back? And my parents were like, yeah, of course. And I was kind of like, oh, in my head I was just picturing the headlines like entire family murdered on Christmas Eve, and I was like, really, we're inviting him back? But I'm glad we did. He came back. He got a nice Christmas meal, and then we gave him a ride back to kind of the halfway house that he lived in. But anyway, he was on antipsychotics just like this, and his body was the same shape. He kind of had the same like gut. that James Holmes has, and his hands. I remember just staring at his hands a lot, and they looked exactly like James Holmes's, just the way that they move. So James is just heavily medicated. That might be kind of why he's just like this the whole time. Like, yep, nope. Very, very concise answers, very not a lot of words out of James, almost to the point where it's comical, where the psychiatrist will be like, is there anything else that you want to add about your theory that every problem can be solved with death? And he's just like, nope. You're like, okay. All right. So he's been in solitary for 2 years. There's a great documentary on solitary confinement that I'm going to link in the description. I think another channel took the documentary and put it on their own channel. So the first thing you see when you click on the documentary is like, this is the most controversial documentary on the internet. Please subscribe. And then it goes into the documentary. I wouldn't subscribe. I think it's just a like a, I don't know, not a scam channel, but just like, just disregard the like, this is the most insane documentary on the internet. That was added by the channel, so I'll link that. But he's been in solitary for 2 years. So he's ready to talk to someone. All right, so let's get into, I'm going to start back in middle school. And in middle school, for the first time, James thought he was different. He called it, he had a broken brain. Sad, man. Mental illness is really sad for everybody involved. And for the first time, he thought he had a broken brain, and he just felt different from everybody else. And as the psychiatrist brought up, that's actually pretty common to late middle school, early high school, for kids to think that, one, you're different, and two, that there's just something wrong with you. There's a lot of angst. So it's not totally, it doesn't mean that you're going to dye your head like the Joker and shoot up a theater if you think that, but that is what he thought. And he thought that a sad detail was, he thought that he would go into neuroscience as a middle schooler so he could fix his own brain. Kind of a sad detail. And parents didn't think too much of, as he moved into high school and had some social issues, but didn't think too much because his dad is a little bit social anxiety. I think his dad is pretty high IQ, and he's kind of one of those guys that maybe the IQ hurts his communication a little bit. But in high school, James was pretty successful. He played JV soccer, he was cross country, and he said that if there was 100 people running in the cross country race, he would usually come in around 30, which that's a good enough at cross country to where it's fun, if you're coming in 30 out of 100. Then he played JV soccer. And he said that playing sports and sort of being around that group of people with everybody's got the same mission to play sports and to, work on their team, helped his social anxiety. And he had a 4.0 in high school, and he had some friends in high school, and he really enjoyed doing schoolwork, and he was really good at it. And so again, he felt distanced by people in social situations where he would freeze up. So if there was a bunch of people talking, he would be in his head, be like, oh, I should say something. They think I'm weird because I'm not saying anything. And then he would freeze up. And then if they actually did ask him something like, hey, what do you think, James? He kind of just would freeze, and he would feel horrible about it. And like everybody was talking behind his back. And, but again, he was playing sports. He had a 4.0. I think that people were like, all right, so he's got some issues, but still, I don't think anyone thought that he was just the total violent person that he turned out to be. But he really is, whatever is wrong with his head, there's a lot going on in there, and it's really wrong, and it's Um, it kind of has pushed him just to total evil, as we'll get through this. And it's sad, like I said, it's sad for everybody involved, but it is him. It's his head. So, all right, so let's keep moving. So then he goes to college, and again, very close to a 4.0 in college. I think he had a 3.9. He liked the classes. He liked the schoolwork. He had friends. I think the most successful that he would be in college was doing a lab with somebody. So they're both doing schoolwork. There's something to do while they're, half doing something, half socializing. So I think having that schoolwork to do gave him a task in the social situation, which made it go a lot smoother. He's not just sitting there like, yep, did I tell you my theory on death? So he goes to college, very successful, has a girlfriend. They have a successful sexual relationship. So he's not one of these mass shooters that just like think that women screwed him over because they all hate him. He's not like that. He wasn't really bullied more than, other people, no one of which that do mass shootings. So similar to, I read the Columbine book, and by that guy, he's a journalist that covered it for 10 years. Then he put a book out by the Columbine shooting. And sort of the main theme of the whole shooting is the media ran with the story that it was bullying. It was an easy thing for everybody to digest. Like, oh, that makes sense. Everybody was really mean to him. And then he killed him. But that's not really how it went. He was pretty much liked. And same with James. He had, awkward social situations, but most high schoolers do. So then after college, he moved back home. And I think this was not a good time in James's life. For the first time, his parents and him didn't get along really well. They were pressuring him like, James, you're not really doing anything. You gotta go out and do something, buddy. You gotta get a job. You're just sitting around playing video games. And so James, he goes out and gets a job where kind of just like a factory job where they put the paint on pills. They like put the coating on pills, and so a machine sprays all the pills for this pharmaceutical company. And he would stand there and make sure the nozzles that shoot out the coating don't get clogged. So it's a very kind of just like a monkey could do it type job. But he didn't get fired. He wasn't weird enough or unlikable enough to get fired. They liked him. They offered him a permanent position, but he turned it down. Oops, sorry, a little tea. He really, I don't think, felt like he had a purpose at this point. And humans need a purpose. They really do. It's a big part of who we are, is you gotta have a purpose. You gotta feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself. Or I think you slowly kind of rot or get depressed. And so he didn't feel like he had a purpose. I think probably that feeling mixed with the depression of, but I feel like it's depressing for everybody. When you get done with college, you have no idea what to do. You're living back with your parents. It's not ideal. And I don't know whether to push off, if it was always the plan, or to push off trying to find a real job. He decides to go to grad school in Colorado. So he moves back, and he is going to grad school. And he's doing well in grad school, but he's very depressed. And he becomes suicidal. And out of that suicidal thoughts, and to this day, he believes that the only way to prevent suicide, you can transfer it to homicide. And so to this day, he thinks that the shooting, or what he calls the mission, saved him, because he was either going to be suicide or homicide. And so again, when asked was the shooting successful and would you do it again, The answer is yes, and that it's because it makes him worth more. He's worth 13, and that it saved him because it was either suicide or homicide. So, some point in this life, or some point during this grad school period of depression and stuff, he dedicated his life to killing as many people as possible. And his thought, and to this day, he didn't come out and say it, but I think the interview, there's a point where the psychiatrist asked, "Would you kill again, or would they need to be worried about you?" And he said, "I think so." And so here is a guy that he thinks if you kill someone, you get their value. He thinks that every problem can be solved with death. He thinks he's very suicidal, and he thinks the only way to keep himself alive and also increase his worth is by killing as many people as possible. And I don't really feel like an armchair psychiatrist. I've never really have, like, trying to diagnose him. Maybe he's got schizophrenia, or he's got this, or he's mentally ill. It's not his fault. I agree that it's very sad, but the way that I kind of naturally think about these crimes is from a public safety point of view. Like, we're all in this, like, we're all in a small town, and this is the situation that arises. We got James Holmes, and this is what he's thinking, this is what he does. So it's like the doctor is like, "I think that he's this, and here's some big words," and I'm more of like, "Oh, thank you, doctor. I'm glad you studied for all these years, and thank you for all your big words. But we got to put him in a box forever. He can't be out just on a public safe. It's not fair to other people that are living their lives. You don't. It's not fair to have your life taken away by, I know he's sick, but it's not fair. He's got to be either in a box forever, or we got to kill him. That's the two." That's the two options, in my opinion. And so anyway, so he's very low in this time, and he is transferring the energy from suicide to homicide, and that's when he starts the plan. And that's where I'll start tomorrow. He starts planning it. He meticulously plans it, and then we'll go over the actual plan, or the actual event itself, and we'll just keep moving through. Susan Bond's easily titled big 5-hour chunks, so it's easy to pick off where you left off, or in the description. The documentary on solitary confinement is in the description. Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. True Crime Loser out. Why? Starving why?